Hey guys, tonight we're going to walk through the brutal reality of what it meant to wake up as an enslaved person on a southern plantation in the 1840s. You'll feel the rough burlap against your skin as you rise before dawn. Hear the crack of the overseer's whip cutting through humid air, and taste the meager portions of cornmeal and salt pork that barely kept bodies alive. The sun beats down mercilessly on cotton fields that stretch endlessly toward horizons you'll never reach as a free person, while mosquitoes buzz around wounds that never quite heal. You probably won't survive this emotionally unscathed. The weight of witnessing such systematic dehumanization has a way of settling deep in your chest and staying there. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. Drop your location and local time in the comments below. Now, let's find that cozy spot, pull a blanket around you, and gently drift into tonight's calm adventure. The rooster hasn't even crowed when you feel the rough shake of a hand on your shoulder. It's still pitch black outside the cramped slave quarters, but you know without looking that it's time. Your body aches from yesterday's labor, your back throbs where the cotton sack rubbed raw against your spine, and your hands are still tender from picking thorns that caught your fingers like tiny claws. But there's no time to dwell on pain. You roll off the thin straw mattress you share with two other adults, careful not to wake the children curled up on the dirt floor nearby. The air inside the cabin is thick and stale, heavy with the breath of too many bodies crammed into a space barely 12 feet square. Through the gaps in the wooden walls, you can feel the cool pre-dawn breeze that will disappear once the sun rises. You fumble in the darkness for your only set of work clothes, a coarse cotton shirt and pants that have been patched so many times the original fabric is barely visible. The fabric is stiff with dried sweat and dirt that no amount of scrubbing in the creek can fully remove. Outside, you can hear the stirring of others in the quarters. Babies cry softly, quickly hushed by mothers who know that loud noises this early might bring unwanted attention from the overseer's cabin. Someone coughs a deep, wet sound that's been getting worse for weeks. There's no doctor for people like you. No medicine, except whatever roots and herbs the older folks remember from their grandmother's knowledge. You step outside onto the packed earth that serves as your doorstep. The quarters stretch out before you, in the pre-dawn gloom, a long row of identical wooden cabins, each housing multiple families, with no privacy, no space to call truly your own. The air smells of wood smoke from cooking fires that never quite die out, mixed with the less pleasant odors of too many people living too close together with inadequate sanitation. The bell hasn't rung yet, but you know it will soon. Master's schedule runs like clockwork, and that clock begins before the sun shows its face. You use these precious quiet minutes to splash cold water from the communal bucket onto your face and hands. The water is cloudy, drawn from a well that's too close to the privy, but it's all you have. You drink deeply, knowing it might be hours before you get another chance. Around you, other figures move like shadows in the darkness. Old Ben, whose back is so curved from decades of fieldwork that he can barely stand straight anymore, shuffles past carrying a hoe that's been sharpened so many times the blade is half its original width. Sarah, just 16 but already the mother of 2 babies, emerges from her cabin with an infant strapped to her back with strips of cloth. The baby will spend the day in the fields with her. There's no one else to watch him. No nursery, except what the mothers can manage while working. You think about the dream that woke you briefly in the night. You were walking down a dirt road, but in the dream, you could keep walking as far as you wanted. No one called you back, no one owned your steps. But dreams like that are dangerous. They make the reality of your situation feel even heavier when you wake up. You've learned to push such thoughts down deep, to focus instead on just getting through each day. The first bell rings out across the plantation, a harsh bronze clang that cuts through the morning quiet like a blade. Immediately, the quarters come alive with movement. Doors creak open, footsteps shuffle on dirt paths, and quiet voices exchange the briefest of greetings. There's no time for lingering, the overseer expects everyone at their assigned workstations within 15 minutes of the first bell. You join the stream of people walking toward the fields. In the growing light, you can see the plantation house. In the distance, a grand white structure with tall columns and wide verandas, surrounded by perfectly manicured gardens. Smoke rises from its many chimneys as the house servants prepare breakfast for the master's family. The contrast between that elegant home and the rough quarters where you sleep is stark and intentional. It's meant to remind you every day of your place in this world. The field stretches before you like an ocean of green cotton plants, their white bowls glowing faintly in the early morning light. Row after endless row disappears into the distance, each one requiring your bent back and bleeding hands to harvest. You're assigned to Section 7 today. You know because the overseer calls out assignments in a voice that carries across the field like thunder. Mr. Patterson is a lean man, with pale skin that burns red in the sun, and eyes like chips of ice. He carries a whip coiled at his side, and isn't shy about using it. You take your position at the beginning of your row, pulling the heavy cotton sack over your shoulder. The bag will grow heavier as the day progresses, the strap cutting deeper into your flesh with each pound of cotton you add. The goal is clear pick, clean every bowl in your assigned rows before the sun sets. Fail to meet the quota, and you'll face punishment that could range from reduced rations to the lash dot. The work begins in earnest as the sun crests the horizon. You move down your row with practiced efficiency, your fingers quickly separating the soft white cotton from its tough protective casing. The bowls are sharp, designed by nature to protect their contents, and your fingertips are soon dotted with small cuts that sting with each new plant you touch. But you've developed over the years, thick patches of hardened skin that provide some protection. The sun climbs higher, and with it comes the heat that will define your day. By mid-morning, sweat is already running down your face and soaking through your shirt. The cotton sack grows heavier with each handful you add, the weight pulling at your shoulder and forcing you to bend lower with each step. Your back begins, that familiar ache that will intensify as the hours pass. Around you, others work in similar silence. Talking is discouraged in the field. It slows down work, and slowness is not tolerated. But occasionally, someone hums a low tune, a melody that seems to make the work flow a little easier. These songs are never the hymns sung in the Master's church, but older melodies that carry traces of languages and lands most of you have never seen but somehow remember in your bones. The sun continues its relentless climb. By noon, the heat is oppressive, pressing down on you like a heavy blanket. Your cotton sack now weighs 40 pounds, maybe 50, enough to make each step an effort. Sweat stings your eyes and makes your hands slippery, causing you to fumble with the cotton bowls and slow your pace. But slowing down isn't an option. Mr. Patterson rides his horse up and down the rows, keeping watch for any signs of laziness. The lunch break, when it finally comes, is brief, perhaps 20 minutes to sit in whatever shade you can find and eat a cold portion of cornbread and a drink of water from a shared bucket. The bread is hard and gritty, made from coarse meal, but it's sustenance. You eat every crumb, knowing you'll need the energy for the long afternoon ahead. During this short rest, you allow yourself to really look at the other workers. There's Moses, an old man who was brought here from Virginia when you were just a child. His hair has gone completely white, and his hands shake slightly when he's not working. But his cotton-picking skills are still among the best in the field. He's taught many of the younger workers his techniques, how to position your fingers to avoid the worst of the thorns, how to pack cotton efficiently in your sack to carry more weight with less effort. There's also Mary, a woman about your age, who arrived 3 years ago when her previous master died and his property was divided among his heirs. She was separated from her husband and 2 young children in the process, sold 2 different plantations. Sometimes you catch her staring off toward the eastern horizon, and you know she's thinking about them. She never speaks of them directly. That kind of talk is too painful, too dangerous, but the loss shows in her eyes. The afternoon sun beats down with increasing intensity. The cotton sack now weighs close to 70 pounds, and the strap has worn a groove in your shoulder that throbs with each movement. Your back screams in protest every time you bend to reach a low-hanging bowl, but the plants don't care about your pain. They need to be picked clean. Every useful fiber harvested for the master's profit. The heat creates a shimmering haze over the fields, making distant objects waver like mirages. Your throat is parched, despite the water breaks, and salt deposits from dried sweat create a crystalline residue on your dark skin. The cotton plants themselves seem to wilt in the heat, their leaves drooping, but the bowls remain stubbornly attached, requiring your persistent efforts to remove them. You've developed a rhythm over the years: reach, grasp, pull, drop in, bag, step forward, repeat. The motion becomes almost automatic, allowing your mind to wander even as your body continues the repetitive motions. You think about the evening meal, wondering if there will be any meat to go with the usual cornmeal mush. Sometimes the master allows a pig to be slaughtered, providing a rare treat of pork to supplement the monotonous diet. But such pleasant thoughts are interrupted by a commotion 3 rows over. Jenny, a young woman new to the plantation, has collapsed in the heat. She lies unconscious among the cotton plants, her dark skin having a grayish pallor that speaks of heat exhaustion. Several workers gather around her, but Mr. Patterson quickly rides over, his whip in hand. "Get back to work," he shouts, his voice carrying clearly across the field. "She's just being lazy. Pour some water on her and get her back up." You know this isn't true. Jenny has been pushing herself hard, trying to prove her worth and avoid punishment. But the overseer's word is law in these fields. Someone does pour water from their precious ration onto Jenny's face, and after a few minutes, she struggles to her feet, swaying slightly, but determined to continue working. The alternative, being labeled as a malkara, could result in a whipping or reduced food rations she can't afford. The incident serves as a grim reminder of the complete lack of concern for your welfare as human beings. You are valuable only insofar as you can produce profit for the plantation. When you can no longer work effectively, you become a liability rather than an asset. You've seen older slaves, worn out by decades of hard labor, relegated to the most menial tasks, or simply left to die with minimal care. As the afternoon wears on, the weight of your cotton sack approaches 80 pounds. Each step requires conscious effort, and the strap has now cut completely through your shirt to rub directly against your skin. You can feel warmth there that suggests bleeding, but there's nothing to be done about it. The cotton must be picked. The quota must be met. The sun begins its descent toward the western horizon, but it seems to move with agonizing slowness. Your assigned rows stretch ahead of you like an accusation: so many plants still unpicked, so much cotton still hanging on their bowls. You calculate frantically in your mind: at your current pace, will you finish before dark? The consequences of failing to meet quota are too severe to contemplate. Other workers around you are experiencing similar struggles. You can hear the labored breathing of those carrying heavy sacks, see the way they walk with increasingly stiff gaits as their backs and shoulders protest the continuous strain. But everyone keeps moving, keeps picking, because the alternative is worse. The overseer makes another pass through the fields, his horse's hooves kicking up small clouds of dust. He stops periodically to examine individual workers' progress, sometimes making notes in a small leather book he carries. Those notes can determine everything from tomorrow's work assignments to whether someone receives their full food ration. Being written down for poor performance can have consequences that extend far beyond a single day. Your hands are now bleeding more freely from the constant contact with thorns. and rough cotton bolls. The cuts sting with each new plant you touch, but you've learned to work through the pain. At the end of the day, you'll try to wash the wounds with water and perhaps wrap them with strips of cloth torn from some old garment. But for now, they're just another element of the job. The cotton sack is approaching its maximum capacity, nearly 90 pounds of raw cotton that represents hours of back-breaking labor. The strap has cut so deeply into your shoulder that you can feel blood soaking through your shirt, but the weight must be carried until you reach the designated weighing station. There, a white man with a large scale will determine whether your day's work meets the plantation's standards. As evening approaches, the sounds of the field begin to change. The rhythmic swish of cotton plants being disturbed by dozens of workers continues, but it's now accompanied by the subtle sounds of exhaust and heavier breathing. More frequent pauses, the occasional groan when someone's back spasms after hours of bending over. The light begins to take on that golden quality that signals day's end is approaching. For most people, this might be a beautiful time of day, but for you, it brings anxiety. Have you picked enough cotton to avoid punishment? Are your assigned rows clean enough to pass inspection? These questions create a knot of tension in your stomach that compounds the physical exhaustion of your body. You push harder, ignoring the screaming protests from your back and shoulders. Your fingers move faster among the cotton bolls, accepting more cuts and scratches in exchange for speed. Every additional handful of cotton in your sack is insurance against the overseer's displeasure, protection against accusations of laziness or defiance. The sun touches the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that under other circumstances might be considered beautiful. But beauty is a luxury you can't afford to contemplate. Your entire focus remains on the cotton plants in front of you, on meeting the quota that will allow you to return to your quarters without punishment. Finally, the evening bell rings across the plantation, a sound that brings relief but also apprehension. Relief because the day's picking is over. Apprehension because now comes the weighing. The moment when the overseer determines whether your efforts have been sufficient. You hoist your cotton sack and join the line of workers trudging toward the weighing station. Your legs are unsteady after the long day of constant movement, and the weight of the cotton makes each step an effort. Around you, other workers carry similar burdens, their faces showing the same mixture of exhaustion and anxiety that you feel. The weighing station is a simple setup, a large scale suspended from a wooden frame, with Mr. Patterson standing beside it holding his leather record book. Each worker must lift their sack onto the scale while he records the weight next to their name. The minimum quota is 75 pounds of clean cotton, though experienced pickers are expected to exceed this significantly. As you wait in line, you can hear the results of those ahead of you. 82 pounds, acceptable. 68 pounds, not enough. See me after supper. 91 pounds, good work. Each pronouncement determines not just how the individual worker will be treated tonight, but influences their standing on the plantation for days to come. Your turn arrives, and you struggle to lift your heavy sack onto the scale. The metal arm swings and settles. Mr. Patterson squints at the markings and makes a note in his book. 87 pounds, he announces. Acceptable work. The relief that floods through you is almost physical. You've avoided punishment for another day. You empty your cotton into the large wagon that'll carry it to the gin house, where machines will separate the valuable fibers from their seeds. Tomorrow, this cotton might begin its journey to textile mills in the north or in England, transformed into cloth that will clothe people who will never know the bleeding hands that picked it. From these plants, the walk back to the quarters feels endless despite the relatively short distance. Your body, pushed to its limits throughout the day, now rebels against even simple movement. Your shoulder throbs where the sack strap cut into it. Your back spasms with each step, and your feet, swollen from standing and walking on uneven ground for 12 hours, barely fit in your worn-out shoes. The quarters are already showing signs of activity as people prepare for the evening meal. Cooking fires send spirals of smoke into the darkening sky, and the smell of cornmeal mush fills the air. It's not an appetizing smell exactly, but after a day without food, it represents sustenance and the promise of rest. Your cabin feels even more cramped after the wide open fields, but it's a relief to be out of the overseer's direct sight. You collapse onto your straw mattress, every muscle in your body crying out for rest. But there's still work to be done. Your wounds need attention, your clothes need whatever cleaning you can manage, and the evening meal requires participation in the communal cooking arrangements. You examine your hands by the dim light filtering through the cabin's single window. The cuts are numerous and some quite deep, the result of thousands of contacts with sharp cotton bowls and thorny plant stems. You'll wrap them with strips of cloth torn from an old shirt, but tomorrow they'll reopen within the first hour of work. It's a cycle that repeats endlessly: injury, makeshift treatment, renewed injury. Your shoulder is worse than your hands. The constant friction of the cotton sack strap has worn completely through your shirt and carved a groove in your flesh. The wound is bleeding steadily, and you know from experience that it will become infected if not properly cleaned. But proper cleaning requires soap and clean water, luxuries that aren't available to people like you. The evening meal is served in the common area between the cabins, a simple space with long wooden tables and benches. The food is basic: cornmeal mush, maybe some beans if you're fortunate, and occasionally a small piece of salt pork for flavoring. The portions are calculated to provide just enough nutrition to keep you working, nothing more. Hunger is a constant companion, a hollow feeling in your stomach that food temporarily alleviates but never fully satisfies. You sit with the same people you work alongside in the fields. Conversation is subdued, everyone is exhausted, and besides, there's little to discuss that won't remind you of your circumstances. Someone mentions that they heard the master talking about selling some of the older workers, but such news is too disturbing to dwell on. Instead, people focus on their food, eating slowly to make the meager portions seem more substantial. After the meal, there's perhaps an hour of daylight remaining. This is time that belongs to you, the only period of the day when you're not under direct supervision. Some people use it to tend to personal needs: washing clothes in the creek, mending tears in their few garments, or trying to clean themselves as best they can with limited water and no soap. Others gather in small groups to share stories or sing songs that connect them to traditions and memories that slavery cannot completely erase. These songs are different from the work songs heard in the fields. They speak of longing, of faith, of hope for better times that seem impossibly distant but remain alive in the hearts of those who sing them. You choose to spend your free time trying to tend to your wounds, using water from the communal bucket and strips torn from an old shirt. You clean the cuts on your hands as best you can. The water stings the open wounds, but you know that infection could leave you unable to work, and being unable to work brings consequences too terrible to consider. The wound on your shoulder is more challenging. You can't see it clearly, and reaching it requires contorting your arm in ways that send fresh waves of pain through your abused muscles. But you do what you can, wrapping the area with cloth that will be soaked with blood again by tomorrow evening. As full darkness approaches, the quarters begin to settle into their nighttime routine. Families gather in their cramped cabins. Parents try to comfort children who are too young to understand why life must be so hard. And everyone prepares for sleep on mattresses that barely qualify as such. You lie down on your straw mattress, sharing space with two other adults in a room barely large enough for one. The straw is old and compacted, providing little cushioning for your aching body. But after 12 hours of constant movement and labor, even this uncomfortable surface feels like luxury. Sleep should come easily to someone so exhausted, but your mind remains active despite your body's need for rest. You think about tomorrow, which will bring the same routine: the pre-dawn wake up, The long day in the fields, the evening wane with its potential for punishment or reprieve. Each day blends into the next in an endless cycle of labor and survival. You also think about Jenny, the young woman who collapsed in the heat today. She recovered enough to finish her work, but you could see the toll it took on her. How many more days like today can her body endure? How many more can yours? These are questions without comfortable answers, realities that must be pushed aside to maintain sanity. Through the thin cabin walls, you can hear the sounds of other families settling in for the night. A baby cries softly and is quickly hushed. Someone coughs that same wet cough you heard this morning, perhaps worse now. An elderly man groans as he tries to find a comfortable position for joints that have been worked past their endurance. These sounds, which might be disturbing in other circumstances, are oddly comforting here. They remind you that you're not alone in your suffering, that the quarters are full of people who understand your situation because they share it. There's solidarity in shared hardship, a bond that develops among people who face similar challenges together. But even this small comfort is tinged with sadness. The community that has developed in the quarters exists only because you've all been forced together by circumstances beyond your control. The relationships formed here, while genuine and important, are constantly threatened by the master's decisions about buying and selling human beings like property. You've learned not to get too attached to people, because attachment makes separation more painful. The plantation's population changes regularly as people are sold to settle debts, traded for other workers, or sometimes purchased simply because another plantation offers a better price. Families are broken up without regard for human bonds. Children separated from parents, spouses from each other. The thought of such separations brings back memories you try not to dwell on. Your own parents were sold when you were 12, sent to plantations in different states that might as well be different worlds. You haven't seen them since, don't know if they're alive or dead, healthy or suffering. This uncertainty is perhaps worse than knowing they're gone. It keeps grief fresh and hope painful. You force yourself to stop thinking about such things. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges, and you need what rest you can get to face them. Your body certainly needs the recovery time. Every muscle aches, every joint protests, even the simple movements required to adjust your position on the mattress. But even as you try to quiet your mind, you can't completely escape awareness of your circumstances. The cramped cabin, the thin mattress, the knowledge that in just a few hours you'll be woken to begin another day identical to today's realities seep into your consciousness even as you drift towards sleep. Your dreams, when they come, are a mixture of memory and longing. Sometimes you dream of the fields, reliving the day's labor in endless repetition. Sometimes you dream of places you've never been, wide roads that lead to destinations of your choosing. Sometimes you dream of people you've lost, conversations that feel so real you wake expecting to find them beside you. But morning always comes too soon, bringing with it the familiar routine that defines your existence. The hand on your shoulder, the pre-dawn darkness, the gathering in the quarters as another day of labor begins. Your body, which felt impossibly tired when you collapsed onto your mattress, must somehow find the energy to repeat yesterday's performance. This is the reality of life on a southern plantation in the 1840s. A cycle of labor and survival that consumes every day from before sunrise to well after sunset. It's a life measured not in dreams achieved or goals reached, but in quotas met and punishments avoided. Its existence reduced to its most basic elements: work, eat, sleep, survive. And yet, even within this brutal system, humanity finds ways to persist. In the songs hummed while working, in the care shown for fellow workers who stumble, in the stories told during brief evening gatherings, the essential dignity of the human spirit refuses to be completely crushed. It's a small rebellion, perhaps, but one that keeps hope alive, even in the darkest circumstances. As sleep finally claims you, your body beginning the process of whatever recovery it can manage in the few hours before dawn. You carry with you the knowledge that tomorrow will bring the same challenges, the same pain, the same need to endure. But you also carry something else, the stubborn refusal to let your circumstances define your worth as a human being. This inner strength, invisible to the overseers and masters who see you only as a unit of labor, is perhaps the most remarkable aspect of survival under such conditions. It's the difference between mere existence and maintaining some essential part of yourself that remains free even when your body is enslaved. The night passes in fitful rest, broken by the discomfort of your wounds and the anticipation of tomorrow's labor. But it passes nonetheless, bringing you closer to another dawn, another day of endurance, another small victory, simply in surviving until sunset. The weeks blur together in a monotonous rhythm of dawn bells and cotton quotas, but today brings something different. You wake not to the usual shake on your shoulder, but two urgent whispers cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. Something has happened during the night. Something that has the entire quarters buzzing with nervous energy, despite the early hour. As you sit up on your straw mattress, you can make out Sarah's voice, low but tense, speaking to someone near the cabin door. They caught him just past Miller's Creek, she's saying. Had the dogs out all night. Found him hiding in that old tobacco barn about 5 miles north. Your stomach drops as the meaning becomes clear. Someone tried to run. Someone made the desperate choice to risk everything for freedom. And like most who make that choice, they didn't make it far. The plantation's system for recapturing runaways is efficient and brutal. Trained dogs that can follow a scent for miles, local patrols that know every hiding place in the county, and rewards offered to anyone who brings back escaped slaves. You dress quickly and step outside to join the gathering crowd. The whispers continue, fragments of information passed from person to person like pieces of a terrible puzzle. It was Timothy, the young man who arrived just 3 months ago after being sold from a plantation in Georgia. He'd been quiet since his arrival, keeping to himself. But you'd noticed the way his eyes always seemed to be measuring distances, calculating possibilities. The punishment for attempted escape is severe and public. Master Thornton believes in making examples that will discourage others from similar thoughts. By the time the work bell rings, everyone in the quarters knows what happened, and everyone knows what's coming. The day's work will proceed as usual, but it will end with a gathering that no one wants to attend. But everyone will be required to witness. Your assigned section today is closer to the plantation house than usual, close enough that you can see the activity around the main buildings. Extra white men have arrived, neighbors, and local officials who've come to witness the punishment. Their horses are tied to the hitching posts near the master's front porch, and their voices carry across the distance with the casual tone of men discussing ordinary business. The work feels different today. The usual rhythm is disrupted by an undercurrent of tension that affects everyone in the fields. People work more quietly than usual, heads down, avoiding eye contact even with each other. The overseer seems more watchful too, his horse making more frequent passes through the rows, his hand never far from the coiled whip at his side. You try to focus on the cotton plants in front of you, but your mind keeps returning to Timothy. You remember the first time you saw him, standing uncertainly at the edge of the quarters, while Mr. Patterson explained the plantation's rules. He'd looked around at the cramped cabins, the worn faces of the other workers, and something in his expression suggested he was already planning his escape. The morning progresses with agonizing slowness. Every sound seems amplified, the rustle of cotton plants, the shuffle of feet on dirt paths, the distant voices from the plantation house. You find yourself listening for something specific, though you're not sure what. Perhaps the sound of Timothy being brought back, or the preparations for his punishment. Around mid-morning, a commotion near the overseer's cabin draws everyone's attention. A group of white men on horseback arrives, and among them, barely visible at the center of the group, is a figure you recognize. Timothy walks with his hands bound behind his back, his clothes torn and dirty from his night in hiding. Even from a distance, you can see that he's been beaten. His movements are stiff and painful, and dark stains on his shirt suggest bleeding wounds. The overseer calls out across the field, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "Everyone keep working. Anyone who stops to gawk will join him tonight." The threat is effective. Heads turn back to cotton plants with practice speed, but the tension in the field has increased noticeably. Your hands shake slightly as you continue picking cotton. The sight of Timothy, captured and beaten, brings back your own memories of watching similar scenes unfold. You've witnessed 3 escape attempts in your years on this plantation, and none ended well for those who tried. The punishments are designed not just to hurt the individual who attempted escape, but to terrorize everyone else into compliance. The sun climbs higher, and with it comes the oppressive heat that makes the cotton fields feel like a furnace. But today the heat seems worse than usual, perhaps because of the anxiety that adds to the physical discomfort. Your cotton sack grows heavy as the morning progresses, but the familiar weight feels different somehow, more like a chain than simply a burden. During the brief lunch break, conversation is muted and careful. People eat their cornbread in small groups, speaking in voices barely above whispers. The usual complaints about aching backs and bleeding hands seem trivial in the face of what's coming. Someone mentions that Timothy has family back in Georgia, wife and 2 young children, who were sold to a different plantation when he was brought here. That knowledge makes his escape attempt both more understandable and more tragic. Old Moses, who's witnessed more punishments than anyone wants to count, shakes his head slowly as he chews his bread. "Boy should have known better," he says quietly. "Should have waited, planned better." Running without thinking just gets you caught and makes things worse for everyone. But even as he criticizes Timothy's methods, there's something in Moses's eyes that suggests understanding, perhaps even approval, of the attempt itself. The desire for freedom burns in everyone here, regardless of how hopeless the situation might seem. Timothy just acted on impulses that others have learned to suppress. The afternoon work proceeds under increasingly heavy supervision. More white men have arrived at the plantation, and some of them ride through the fields, observing the workers with the casual interest of people watching animals in a zoo. Their presence adds another layer of humiliation to the day's labor, being watched and evaluated by people who see you as nothing more than property. You notice that the newer workers, those who've been on the plantation for less than a year, seem especially affected by the morning's events. They work with a nervous energy that suggests they're reconsidering their own thoughts about escape. The older hands, those who've been here for years or decades, work with the steady rhythm of people who've seen this before and know that the best strategy is to keep their heads down and avoid attention. As the sun begins its descent toward the western horizon, the tension in the fields becomes almost palpable. Everyone knows that the day's regular work will end soon, but instead of the usual relief, there's only dread. The punishment that awaits Timothy will be witnessed by every person on the plantation, a deliberate choice by Master Thornton to ensure maximum impact. The evening bell rings with its usual harsh clang, but today it sounds more like a funeral bell than a signal for rest. You join the line for the daily win, hoisting your cotton sack with movements that feel mechanical and detached. The weight is recorded, the cotton dumped into the wagon, and you're directed not toward the quarters, but toward the area behind the plantation house, where a crowd is already gathering. The scene that greets you is carefully orchestrated to maximize fear and revulsion. A wooden post has been driven into the ground in the center of a clear area, with iron rings attached near the top for securing ropes. Timothy stands nearby, still bound, flanked by 2 white men with rifles. His face shows the results of his capture: swollen features, cuts that have bled and dried, eyes that stare ahead with the blank expression of someone trying to separate their mind from what's happening to their body. Master Thornton stands on a raised platform where everyone can see him clearly. He's a man in his 50s, well-dressed and prosperous looking, with the soft features of someone who's never done physical labor. His voice carries easily across the assembled crowd as he begins to speak about the importance of order and discipline on his plantation. "You all know why we're gathered here tonight," he says, his tone conversational despite the circumstances. "Timothy here thought he could steal himself away from my property, cost me money, and disrupt the good order of this plantation. Well, he's learned that such thinking leads to consequences, and now you're all going to learn the same lesson. You're forced to watch as Timothy is untied from his restraints, only to be immediately secured to the wooden post with ropes that bind his wrists above his head. His shirt is cut away, revealing a back already marked with welts and cuts from his earlier beating. The skin is dark with bruises, and in several places, dried blood has created crusty patches that will soon be reopened. The whip that Mr. Patterson produces is different from the one he carries in the fields. This one is longer, heavier, designed not for motivation, but for maximum pain and damage. The leather strips at its end are stained with the blood of previous victims, a detail that's clearly visible to everyone in the crowd. Master Thornton continues his speech, but you find it difficult to focus on his words. Your attention is drawn instead to Timothy's face, to the way he's trying to prepare himself for what's coming. His jaw is clenched tight, his eyes closed, his whole body tense with anticipation. You've been in his position before. Know the mixture of fear and determination that comes with trying to endure the unendurable. The first blow lands with a sound that seems to echo across the plantation. Timothy's body jerks against the restraints, but he makes no sound. The whip has opened a long cut across his shoulder blades, and blood immediately begins to flow down his back. The crowd watches, and forced silence. Any sound of sympathy or protest would result in joining him at the post. The second blow crosses the first, creating an X-shaped pattern of torn flesh. This time Timothy can't suppress a grunt of pain, though he clearly tries to remain quiet. His hands, bound above his head, clench into fists as his body tries to process the trauma being inflicted on it. By the fifth blow, Timothy is no longer able to maintain his silence. Low moans escape his throat, despite his obvious efforts to remain quiet. The cuts on his back have multiplied into a maze of torn flesh, blood flowing freely down to soak into his pants. His legs, which started the punishment supporting his full weight, now tremble with the effort of keeping him upright. You force yourself to watch, knowing that looking away would be noticed and possibly punished. But each crack of the whip seems to land on your own back. Each cry of pain echoes in your own throat. This is the point of public punishment, to make everyone feel the pain. Everyone understands that they could be next. After 10 blows, Timothy's legs give out completely. His full weight now hangs from the ropes binding his wrists, putting additional strain on his shoulders and arms. Blood covers his entire back, flowing in rivulets that have begun to pool on the ground beneath the post. His head hangs forward, whether from unconsciousness or simply the inability to keep it upright. Master Thornton calls for a pause, not out of mercy, but to ensure that Timothy remains conscious for the full punishment. A bucket of salt water is thrown across his back, causing him to scream and jerk against the restraints as the salt finds every open wound. The purpose is both to clean the wounds enough to see them clearly and to intensify the pain enough to revive him for the remaining blows. The punishment continues for 25 lashes total, a number chosen to inflict maximum suffering while keeping Timothy alive, to serve as a living reminder of the consequences of attempted escape. By the end, his back looks like raw meat, the skin completely destroyed in long strips that expose the muscle beneath. He hangs unconscious from the post, his body occasionally twitching as damaged nerves fire randomly. But the punishment isn't over. While Timothy hangs senseless from the post, Master Thornton addresses the crowd again. His message is simple and direct: anyone who helps a runaway, anyone who fails to report escape plans, anyone who so much as thinks about leaving the plantation without permission will face similar consequences. Timothy will remain tied to this post until morning, he announces. I want everyone to walk past him on your way to the fields tomorrow. I want you to see what happens to ungrateful slaves who bite the hand that feeds them. And I want you to remember that this plantation has ways of making life much worse for anyone who forgets their place. The crowd is dismissed to return to the quarters, but the evening's events have effectively destroyed any possibility of normal activity. People walk back to their cabins in small, silent groups, each lost in their own thoughts about what they've witnessed. The usual evening routines, preparing food, tending to personal needs, sharing conversation, all feel impossible in the wake of such brutality. In your cabin, the silence is oppressive. The three adults who share the small space sit on their mattresses without speaking, each processing the evening's trauma in their own way. Outside, you can hear similar quiet from the other cabins. Even the children, who normally provide some relief from the day's tensions with their play and chatter, seem subdued tonight. Sleep, when it finally comes, is filled with disturbing dreams. You relive Timothy's punishment repeatedly, sometimes watching from the crowd, sometimes finding yourself tied to the post in his place. The sound of the whip, the sight of torn flesh, the smell of blood and fear, all of these sensory details replay in your unconscious mind with vivid clarity. Morning arrives with its usual harsh bell, but the routine feels different as you dress and prepare for another day of fieldwork. The memory of last night's punishment hangs over everything like a dark cloud. As promised, Timothy still hangs from the post. Now unconscious, or possibly dead, it's impossible to tell from a distance. The walk to the fields takes you past the punishment post, and Master Thornton's promise is fulfilled. Everyone must see Timothy's condition, must absorb the lesson of his torn and bloodied back. He's still breathing, you can see, but barely. His body hangs limp from the restraints, and his back, exposed to the night air, has attracted flies that crawl over the open wounds. The sight affects different people in different ways. Some workers hurry past, with their eyes averted, unable to bear looking at what remains of Timothy's back. Others stare with the fascinated horror of people witnessing something too terrible to ignore. A few, mostly the older hands who've seen many such punishments, walk past with expressions of grim acceptance. Your own reaction is a mixture of rage and helplessness that sits in your stomach like a stone. The injustice of it, punishing a man for wanting the freedom that should be his natural right, burns inside you, but alongside the anger is the terrible knowledge that there's nothing you can do to change Timothy's situation or prevent similar punishments in the future. The day's work begins under this cloud of fear and revulsion. The overseer seems particularly watchful, perhaps expecting that Timothy's punishment might provoke some kind of reaction from the other workers. His horse makes more frequent passes through the rows, and his hand stays near his whip as a reminder of his authority. The cotton plants don't care about human drama. They stand in their orderly rows, heavy with bowls that need picking regardless of what happened the night before. Your hands, still tender from yesterday's cuts and scratches, begin the familiar routine of reaching, grasping, pulling, and dropping cotton into your sack. But the work feels different today. Each movement is accompanied by awareness of Timothy still hanging from the post. Each bent back reminds you of his torn flesh. Each step forward in your assigned row is taken with the knowledge that any attempt to step off the plantation would likely end in similar punishment. Around mid-morning, activity near the punishment post indicates that Timothy is finally being cut down. You can't see details from your position in the fields, but you watch as several figures gather around the post and then carry something toward the quarters. Whether Timothy is alive or dead, conscious or unconscious, is impossible to determine. From such a distance, The uncertainty adds another layer of tension to an already difficult day. If Timothy survives, he'll face months of recovery with minimal medical care, during which he'll be unable to work and therefore seen as a burden on the plantation's resources. If he dies, his death will serve as an even stronger warning to anyone else considering escape. Word eventually filters through the fields that Timothy is alive but unconscious. Taken to one of the quarters where the older women will try to tend his wounds with whatever folk remedies they can devise. There's no doctor. For slaves, no medical supplies beyond what can be improvised from plants and herbs. His survival will depend on his own strength and whatever healing knowledge exists among the enslaved community. This news brings a mixture of relief and continued worry. Relief that he hasn't died from his injuries. Worry about what kind of life he'll have if he does recover. The scars from such a severe whipping are permanent, both physical and psychological. Even if the wounds heal, Timothy will carry the marks of his punishment for the rest of his life. The incident also affects the social dynamics within the enslaved community. Some people express quiet sympathy for Timothy's situation, while others criticize his decision to attempt escape. The division reflects different philosophies about how to survive under slavery, whether to accept the situation and try to minimize suffering, or to resist even when resistance seems hopeless. These philosophical differences create tension within the quarters. Those who favor accommodation argue that Timothy's punishment proves the futility of resistance and endangers everyone by provoking increased supervision. Those who sympathize with his escape attempt argue that accepting slavery without resistance is a form of spiritual death that's worse than physical punishment. The debate never happens openly. Such discussions would be far too dangerous if overheard by white ears. Instead, it plays out in meaningful glances, in the choice of who to sit with during meals, in the subtle ways that community relationships shift in response to shared trauma. Your own position in this divide is complex. Part of you admires Timothy's courage in attempting escape, his refusal to accept a life of bondage, even when the consequences of resistance are severe. But another part of you recognizes the practical reality that unsuccessful escape attempts often result in tighter restrictions and increased surveillance for everyone. The afternoon brings news that affects these calculations directly. Master Thornton has announced new rules in response to Timothy's escape attempt. Evening gatherings are now limited to no more than 3 people. Anyone found away from their assigned area without explicit permission will face immediate punishment. The evening free time, already brief, is further reduced to allow for additional supervision. These restrictions affect everyone on the plantation, not just those who might have been contemplating escape. The small freedoms that made daily life bearable, the ability to visit friends in other cabins, to gather for songs and stories, to move around the quarters without constant oversights, are now curtailed. Timothy's individual act of resistance has resulted in collective punishment for the entire enslaved community. The irony is bitter, but intentional. Master Thornton understands that the most effective way to prevent future escape attempts is to make the consequences fall not just on individuals, but on the entire community. By restricting everyone's movements and activities, he creates social pressure against resistance. People become reluctant to risk actions that will result in everyone's punishment. As the day progresses, you can see these new restrictions taking effect. The usual patterns of interaction during brief work breaks are more constrained, with people staying closer to their assigned work areas. Conversation is more guarded, conscious that increased supervision means increased risk of being overheard and misinterpreted. The weight of collective surveillance settles over the plantation like a heavy blanket. Everyone becomes more careful about their words and actions, more aware that anything they do or say might be reported to the overseer. Trust, always fragile in an environment where people might be sold away at any moment, becomes even more precious and carefully guarded. The evening wane proceeds as usual, but the aftermath is different. Instead of the gradual dispersal to various evening activities, people move directly to their assigned cabins and stay there. The common areas between buildings, normally sites of quiet social interaction, remain empty except for the white supervisors, who now patrol them regularly. In your cabin, the atmosphere is oppressive. 3 adults confined to a 12-by-12 space with no privacy and limited conversation creates tension that has nowhere to go. Outside, you can hear the footsteps of patrols, the occasional challenge to someone who ventures too far from their assigned area, the general sounds of a community under martial law. The evening meal is eaten in smaller groups than usual, with conversation limited to the most basic necessities. The food cornmeal mush with a small piece of salt pork tastes the same as always, but the circumstances make it difficult to enjoy even this simple sustenance. Everything is colored by the knowledge that Timothy lies in a nearby cabin, possibly dying from wounds inflicted to terrorize everyone else. As darkness falls, the new restrictions become even more apparent. The usual evening activities quiet, conversations on cabin steps, children playing simple games, adults sharing stories, or songs all disappear under the weight of increased supervision. The quarters, never truly comfortable or free, now feel like a prison camp, with walls made of fear rather than physical barriers. Sleep comes, reluctantly, to a community traumatized by witnessing extreme violence and living under increased restrictions. The normal sounds of people settling in for the night are muted, as if everyone is afraid that even their breathing might attract unwanted attention. In your cabin, the 3 adults lie on their separate mattresses, without the usual quiet conversation that sometimes helps ease the transition from wakefulness to rest. Your own thoughts circle endlessly around the day's events and their implications. Timothy's punishment has changed something fundamental about life on the plantation. The balance between survival and resistance, always precarious, has shifted toward an even more oppressive status quo. The message has been delivered clearly. Any attempt to claim freedom will be met with overwhelming force, and the consequences will extend far beyond the individual who dares to resist. But even as you acknowledge these realities, something inside you refuses to accept them completely. The desire for freedom, suppressed but never eliminated, continues to burn despite the terrible cost Timothy has paid for acting on similar desires. Perhaps that's the most remarkable aspect of the human spirit, its ability to maintain hope even in circumstances designed to crush it completely. The night passes fitfully, punctuated by dreams of whips and screams, of running through dark forests, pursued by baying hounds, of standing at the punishment post while a crowd watches in terrified silence. Morning will bring another day of cotton picking, another day of survival under a system designed to extract maximum labor while providing minimum humanity. But it will also bring another day of endurance, another small victory simply in continuing to exist as a human being rather than accepting definition as mere property. And in that endurance, in that stubborn refusal to be completely broken, lies whatever hope exists for a future different from the present. It's a hope measured not in grand gestures or dramatic escapes, but in the simple act of maintaining dignity and humanity in circumstances designed to destroy both. It's the kind of hope that survives even public whippings, even increased restrictions, even the constant threat of separation and sale. Timothy's broken body, lying in a nearby cabin fighting for life, represents both the cost of resistance and its necessity. His attempt failed, his punishment was severe, and his future remains uncertain. But his willingness to risk everything for freedom has also reminded everyone that such freedom is worth risking everything for, even when the chances of success seem impossibly small. The plantation system depends on breaking that spirit, on convincing enslaved people that resistance is futile and acceptance is the only rational choice. Timothy's punishment was designed to reinforce that message, to demonstrate the hopelessness of fighting against overwhelming power. But the very fact that such extreme measures are necessary reveals the system's fundamental weakness. It can only maintain itself through constant violence and terror, because it lacks any moral foundation that would make people willing to accept it voluntarily. As you drift toward troubled sleep, you carry with you both the trauma of witnessing Timothy's punishment and the knowledge that his courage, however unsuccessful, represents something important about the human spirit that no amount of violence can completely destroy. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new tests of endurance, new reminders of your powerlessness within this system. But it will also bring new opportunities to maintain whatever dignity and humanity remain possible under impossible circumstances, and, perhaps, someday, it will bring opportunities for something more, for the kind of freedom that Timothy reached for when he slipped away into the darkness, heading north toward a promise of liberty that remains real even when it remains unreachable. The seasons change on the plantation, but your circumstances remain achingly constant. Summer's oppressive heat gives way to autumn's deceptive relief, then winter's bitter cold that seeps through the gaps in your cabin walls, and finally spring's false promise of renewal. Each season brings its own challenges, different crops to tend, different weather to endure, different ways for your body to suffer under the relentless demands of forced labor. It's been 3 months since Timothy's punishment, and he has survived, though he bears the permanent marks of that terrible night. The scars on his back have healed into raised ridges of scar tissue that catch and pull whenever he moves. He works now in the stables rather than the fields, his damaged back no longer able to handle the constant bending required for cotton picking. Some see this reassignment as mercy, others as simply a practical decision to extract whatever labor value remains from his broken body. The increased restrictions imposed after his escape attempt have become the new normal. The brief evening gatherings that once provided small respites from the day's hardships are now memories. The casual conversations between cabins, the sharing of songs and stories, the simple human connections that made survival blah blah blah, have been curtailed in the name of preventing future resistance. You've learned to navigate this more constrained world, finding subtle ways to maintain human connections despite the increased surveillance. A meaningful glance during the morning gathering, a quiet word of encouragement during a brief work break, a shared smile when the overseer's attention is elsewhere. These small gestures become precious in their scarcity. The work itself continues its relentless rhythm: cotton in summer and fall, corn and tobacco in spring, maintenance and repair work during winter, when the fields lie dormant. Your hands have developed calluses so thick they're like natural gloves. Your back has curved into the permanent stoop. If someone who spends most of their waking hours bent over growing plants, your shoulders have broadened from years of carrying heavy loads. These physical changes are markers of your enslavement, written into your very body by the demands of plantation labor. But they're also markers of endurance, proof that you've survived another day, another week, another season in circumstances designed to break human beings down to their most basic elements. The plantation's population has shifted over these months, as it always does. 2 families were sold to settle Master Thornton's gambling debts, loaded onto wagons one morning and driven away without ceremony. Their cabins now house new arrivals, a young couple bought at auction in Charleston, an older man whose previous master died without heirs. Each departure tears at the social fabric of the quarters. Each arrival requires painful adjustments, as new people try to find their place in an established but constantly changing community. You've seen children grow up knowing no life but this one, accepting the plantation's restrictions as natural laws rather than human impositions. Their adaptability is both heartbreaking and remarkable. Heartbreaking because they've never experienced freedom. Remarkable because they find ways to play and laugh even in circumstances that would crush most adults. The older residents of the quarters carry different kinds of knowledge. Some remember Africa, though their memories grow dimmer with each passing year. Others remember the early days of slavery in America, when the system was still evolving and some enslaved people managed to purchase their freedom or escape to places where slavery wasn't practiced. These memories, shared in whispered conversations during the brief moments when supervision lapses, provide both comfort and pain. Comfort in knowing that other worlds exist. Pain in understanding how far those worlds now seem. Your own memories have taken on a different quality over the years. Childhood recollections of parents and siblings feel like stories from someone else's life, too distant and different from your current reality to seem entirely real. Sometimes you catch yourself forgetting details: the exact sound of your mother's voice, the way your father's hands looked when he worked, the games you played before you understood what your future held. This forgetting is both loss and protection. Remembering too clearly makes the present unbearable. But forgetting too completely means losing pieces of yourself that slavery hasn't managed to destroy. You walk a careful line between memory and amnesia, holding on to enough of the past to maintain some sense of identity, while letting go of enough to survive the present. The Master's family has also changed during your time on the plantation. Master Thornton's eldest son has married and moved to a plantation of his own, taking several enslaved families with him as wedding gifts. His younger son has begun taking more responsibility for plantation management, displaying an enthusiasm for discipline that makes even the overseer seem lenient by comparison. These changes in white leadership affect daily life in subtle but important ways. Different masters have different temperaments, different ideas about how much punishment is necessary to maintain order, different levels of interest in the lives of their human property. Young Master Edward seems particularly interested in demonstrating his authority, perhaps feeling the need to prove himself worthy of eventually inheriting the plantation. His increased involvement has meant more frequent inspections of the quarters, stricter enforcement of existing rules, and the creation of new restrictions that further constrain the small freedoms that make life bearable. The evening curfew has been moved earlier. The Sunday rest period has been shortened to allow for additional maintenance work, and punishments for minor infractions have become more severe. But even under these increasingly oppressive conditions, life finds ways to assert itself. Couples still fall in love, despite knowing they might be separated by sale at any moment. Children are still born, despite the knowledge that they're being born into bondage. People still sing, still tell stories, still find reasons to smile, however briefly and carefully. These acts of human persistence represent a form of resistance that's perhaps more powerful than dramatic escape attempts. By continuing to love, to hope, to maintain dignity and community connections under impossible circumstances. Enslaved people deny the system's fundamental premise that they are merely property rather than human beings. You've participated in this quiet resistance yourself, though you might not have thought of it in those terms. The care you've shown for injured coworkers, the stories you've shared with frightened newcomers, the songs you've hummed while working, all of these actions affirm your humanity in the face of a system designed to deny it. The small rebellions are everywhere, if you know how to look for them, working slowly when the overseer isn't watching, accidentally damaging tools that make the work harder, sharing food with those whose rations have been reduced as punishment, passing along information about which white people can be trusted and which cannot. These actions don't challenge the system directly, but they make survival within it more possible. Sometimes the resistance takes more direct forms. Tools disappear and reappear, mysteriously damaged. Crops suffer from unexplained blights that might not be entirely natural. Horses go lame from causes that veterinarians can't identify. The master and overseer attribute these problems to bad luck or incompetence, but you and your fellow workers recognize them as small victories in an ongoing war of survival. The psychological toll of this existence is perhaps the heaviest burden to bear. The constant vigilance required to avoid punishment, the need to suppress natural human reactions to injustice and cruelty, the weight of knowing that your life and the lives of everyone you care about are completely subject to the whims of people who see you as economic units rather than fellow human beings. All of this creates a stress that never fully lifts. You've watched people break under this pressure. Some retreat into themselves, becoming so withdrawn that they barely interact with others. Some develop what Master Thornton calls melancholy, a deep depression that makes them unable to work effectively and therefore marks them for sale or harsh punishment. A few simply stop eating, choosing death over continued enslavement despite the efforts of their community to keep them alive. But you've also witnessed remarkable resilience. People who've endured decades of bondage while maintaining their essential humanity, who've raised children and cared for elders and sustained relationships and preserved cultural traditions despite every obstacle the system places in their path. Their example provides both inspiration and instruction in the art of survival under impossible circumstances. The religious life of the quarters reflects these contradictions and complexities. The Christianity taught by white preachers emphasizes obedience and acceptance, promising rewards in the afterlife for those who submit to earthly authority. But the Christianity practiced in the quarters, in secret gatherings hidden from white oversight, emphasizes liberation and justice, drawing parallels between the enslaved Israelites and the enslaved Africans in America. These religious gatherings, when they can be managed safely, provide some of the most powerful moments of community and resistance on the plantation. Singing spirituals that speak of freedom in coded language, sharing prayers that ask for deliverance from bondage, finding strength in biblical stories of oppression overcome these activities. Nourish spirits that daily labor and constant surveillance try to crush. You've participated in these gatherings when possible, finding in them a connection to something larger than the plantation's boundaries. The music, in particular, speaks to something deep in your soul that slavery cannot touch. The caland response patterns, the complex rhythms, the lyrics that work on multiple levels, all of these elements combine to create moments when you feel fully human despite living in a system designed to deny your humanity. The passage of time on a plantation is marked not by calendars, but by agricultural cycles, by the arrival and departure of people, by the accumulation of scars and the wearing down of bodies. You measure your life not in birthdays, but in cotton harvests, not in anniversaries, but in seasons survived. The knowledge that this might continue indefinitely, that you might spend the rest of your life picking cotton and avoiding whippings, and watching people you care about be sold away sometimes feels too heavy to bear. But alongside this despair lives a stubborn refusal to accept that the current situation is permanent. Change seems impossible from your position, but history suggests that no system lasts forever, that even institutions that seem permanent eventually transform or collapse. This hope might seem irrational given your circumstances, but it serves an important function. It allows you to continue investing in relationships despite their fragility, to continue caring about community welfare despite its vulnerability, to continue believing in your own worth despite constant messages to the contrary. The physical environment of the plantation has become so familiar that you navigate it unconsciously. Every path between buildings, every hiding spot where brief conversations might go unnoticed, every vantage point that provides advance warning of approaching overseers, all of this knowledge has been acquired through necessity and refined through practice. But familiarity doesn't breed comfort. The plantation remains a place of constant danger, where any mistake might result in punishment, where any show of independence might be interpreted as defiance, where the simple act of existing as a thinking, feeling human being requires careful concealment. The cotton fields that have consumed so much of your life stretch in all directions, their boundaries defining the limits of your world. You know every inch of those fields, which sections drain poorly after rain, which areas harbor the most insects, which rows provide the best cotton, and which produce the poorest yields. This intimate knowledge of the landscape is both a mark of your imprisonment and a testament to your survival. As another day draws to a close, you walk once again from the fields to the quarters, your cotton sack heavy with the day's harvest, your body aching from hours of bent-back labor. The sun sets behind the master's house, casting long shadows across the grounds that will soon give way to the brief darkness that provides the day's only true privacy. In your cabin, you settle onto the familiar straw mattress, surrounded by the same people who've shared this cramped space for months. Outside, the sounds of the quarters, settling into evening routines, provide a soundtrack of survival quiet conversations. Crying babies quickly hushed, the movements of people trying to find comfort in uncomfortable circumstances. Tomorrow will bring another pre-dawn wake-up call, another day in the fields, another evening of exhausted rest. The routine is unchanging, as predictable as the sunrise that marks the beginning of each day's labor. But within that routine, small variations occur. New people arrive, weather patterns change, seasons shift, and the human drama of life under bondage continues to unfold in all its complexity. Your survival itself is a victory, though it might not feel like one. Every day you maintain your humanity, despite systematic dehumanization. Every moment you care for others, despite your own suffering. Every breath you take in defiance of a system that sees you as property, rather than a person. All of these represent triumphs of the human spirit over forces designed to crush it. The cotton bolls will need picking again tomorrow, and the day after that, and for all the days that stretch ahead into an uncertain future. Your hands will bleed again, your back will ache again, your spirit will be tested again by the relentless demands of plantation life. But you will endure, as you've endured before, because the alternative is unthinkable. In that endurance lies whatever hope exists for change, for justice, for a future where human beings are valued for their humanity rather than their labor. It's a hope that seems impossibly distant from the cramped quarters and cotton fields of your current existence. But it's real nonetheless, as real as the scars on your hands, as persistent as the songs that echo in your memory, as unbreakable as the bonds of community that slavery cannot completely sever. The stars above the plantation shine with the same light that illuminates free people in distant places. That shared sky serves as a reminder that your current circumstances, however permanent they might seem, are temporary arrangements rather than eternal truths. Somewhere beyond those stars, beyond the horizon that marks the boundaries of your enslaved world, freedom exists not just as an abstract concept, but as a lived reality for people who look like you, who dream like you, who deserve the same opportunities that circumstances have denied you. As sleep approaches, bringing with it dreams that might offer brief escapes from plantation reality, you carry with you the knowledge that you've survived another day in circumstances that would destroy lesser spirits. Your persistence in maintaining hope, dignity, and human connections under impossible conditions represents both a personal victory and a contribution to the larger struggle for justice that extends far beyond individual survival. The morning will come too soon, as mornings always do, bringing with it the familiar challenges of cotton quotas and overseer supervision and the constant need to balance survival with resistance. But it will also bring new opportunities to demonstrate that the human spirit cannot be permanently crushed, that dignity cannot be entirely stolen, that the bonds of community can survive even the most determined attempts to break them. In that persistence lies the real defeat of slavery, not in dramatic escapes or violent confrontations, but in the simple, daily act of refusing to be reduced to property, despite every external pressure to accept that reduction. Your life might be constrained by forces beyond your control, but your humanity remains intact, nourished by small acts of kindness, sustained by memories of better times, and strengthened by hopes for a future where freedom is more than just a word whispered in secret gatherings. The cotton fields stretch endlessly toward horizons you cannot cross, but your spirit reaches beyond those boundaries toward possibilities that no master can own and no overseer can control. In that reaching, in that refusal to accept limitation as permanent, lies whatever power remains to you in circumstances designed to strip away all power. Tomorrow's sunrise will illuminate the same plantation buildings, the same cotton fields, the same quarters where you spend your brief hours of rest, but it will also shine on communities of people who've maintained their humanity despite systematic attempts to destroy it, who've preserved traditions despite efforts to eliminate them, who've sustained hope despite every reason for despair. And in that light, in that community, in that hope, lies the promise that current circumstances need not be permanent circumstances, that systems built on injustice contain the seeds of their own transformation, that the human spirit's capacity for endurance ultimately exceeds any system's capacity for oppression. The night deepens around the plantation, bringing temporary relief from labor, but no relief from the weight of bondage. Yet, even in this darkness, something persists that slavery cannot touch: the knowledge that you are more than your circumstances, that your worth exceeds any price that might be paid for your labor, that your humanity survives even when every external condition denies it. This knowledge, passed from generation to generation, despite every attempt to suppress it, represents the ultimate failure of the slavery system to achieve its goal of reducing human beings to property. As long as that knowledge persists, as long as people continue to see themselves and each other as deserving of dignity and freedom, the system's victory remains incomplete. The stars wheel overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human suffering, but somehow comforting in their constancy. They've watched over countless generations of struggle, countless individuals who've faced impossible circumstances with courage and grace. They'll continue watching as the current generation of enslaved people writes its own chapter in the ongoing story of human resistance to dehumanization. And tomorrow, when the bell rings to announce another day of labor, you'll rise again too, meet whatever challenges await, carrying with you the accumulated strength of all those who faced similar challenges before you. Your endurance honors their memory, your persistence serves their legacy, and your refusal to be broken contributes to the larger struggle for a world where freedom is not a privilege of the few, but a birthright of all. The cotton will be picked, the quotas will be met, the system will continue to extract its profit from human suffering, but the human beings caught within that system will continue to find ways to preserve what matters most: their connections to each other, their sense of their own worth, their belief that current circumstances need not be eternal circumstances. In that preservation lies whatever hope exists for change, for justice, for a future where the horrors you've witnessed become historical memories rather than daily realities. It's a hope sustained not by grand gestures, but by countless small acts of humanity. Not by dramatic victories, but by the simple persistence of the human spirit in the face of overwhelming oppression. Your hands feel the familiar ache that marks another day's end. Your body settles into the uncomfortable but known space of your sleeping area. Your mind begins the process of preparing for whatever dreams might come. The plantation sleeps around you, its daily cycle of oppression temporarily suspended, but never truly ended. But even in sleep, even in this place designed to crush human dignity, something essential remains unbroken. It lives in the lullabies mothers sing to children born into bondage, in the stories elders tell about better days, in the prayers whispered in languages the masters cannot understand, in the songs that speak of freedom in coded verses. That something, call it spirit, call it hope, call it the irreducible essence of human dignity, represents the true victory over slavery, not the victory of escape or rebellion, which few can achieve, but the victory of maintaining humanity under circumstances designed to destroy it. This victory belongs to every person who refuses to accept their reduction to property, who continues to love and hope and dream despite every reason to despair. The morning will come, as it always does, bringing with it the familiar challenges of plantation life. But it will also bring new opportunities to demonstrate that the human spirit cannot be permanently enslaved, that dignity cannot be entirely stolen, that hope persists even in the darkest circumstances. In that demonstration lies, whatever power remains available to those caught within systems of oppression, the power to bear witness to their own humanity, to model resilience for those who come after, to contribute through their endurance to the larger struggle for justice that transcends individual lives and circumstances. Your story continues, written in scars and calluses, in moments of kindness, shared despite personal cost, in the simple act of surviving another day with dignity intact. It's a story that honors all who faced similar circumstances before you, and provides strength for all who may face them in the future. The cotton fields await tomorrow's labor, but they cannot contain tomorrow's possibilities. Somewhere beyond their boundaries, freedom exists, not just as an abstract ideal, but as a lived reality that might someday extend to include everyone currently denied its benefits. That possibility, however distant, provides meaning to current suffering and purpose to continued endurance. As the plantation settles into the deepest part of night, you carry with you the knowledge that you've contributed another chapter to the ongoing story of human resilience. Your survival itself is a testimony to the strength of the human spirit. Your persistence, a reminder that no system of oppression can permanently succeed in reducing people to less than they truly are. The stars above shine down on plantation and quarters alike, their light touching, enslaved and free with equal radiance. In that equality lies a truth that no human law can change, that all people deserve dignity, deserve freedom, deserve the chance to write their own stories rather than having their stories written for them by others. Your story continues, night after night, season after season, year after year, testament to endurance, a witness to injustice, a contribution to the larger human struggle for justice and dignity. In its continuation lies, whatever hope exists for a world where such stories need no longer be written, where freedom is universal rather than partial, where human worth is recognized rather than denied. The cotton bolls hang heavy on their plants, ready for tomorrow's picking, but they cannot weigh down the human spirit that refuses to be crushed despite every attempt to break it. That spirit rises each morning with the sun, endures each day's trials with grace, and settles each evening into rest that prepares for another day's persistence. In that rising and enduring and resting, in that simple cycle of survival with dignity intact, lies the ultimate victory over any system that seeks to reduce human beings to mere units of production. It's a victory won not through dramatic gestures, but through countless small acts of humanity. Not through single moments of triumph, but through the accumulated weight of persistent resistance to dehumanization. Your hands rest now from their day's labor, but your spirit continues its work, the work of maintaining hope in hopeless circumstances, of preserving dignity in degrading conditions, of sustaining human connections in a system designed to reduce people to isolated units of production. This work, invisible to the masters and overseers who measure only cotton picked and fields cleared, represents the most important labor performed on any plantation as sleep finally claims you after another day of survival. You carry into your dreams the knowledge that you've contributed to something larger than yourself, the ongoing human struggle to maintain dignity and hope under impossible circumstances. Your contribution may seem small from your perspective, but it's part of a larger tapestry of resistance that includes everyone who refuses to accept their reduction to property. That refusal, multiplied across thousands of individuals and hundreds of plantations, represents a force that no system of oppression can permanently contain. It grows in secret, expressed in songs and stories rather than speeches, nurtured in communities rather than proclaimed in public forums. But it grows nonetheless, fed by every act of kindness, strengthened by every moment of endurance, sustained by every refusal to surrender hope. The plantation sleeps, but the dreams of its enslaved population reach beyond its boundaries, toward possibilities that seem impossible, but remain real. The possibility of freedom, of justice, of a world where human worth is measured by humanity rather than productivity. These dreams, dismissed by those who benefit from the current system as unrealistic fantasies, contain seeds of transformation that will someday reshape reality itself. For now, those dreams must remain private, shared only in whispered conversations and coded songs, but they persist, passed from generation to generation, maintained despite every attempt to crush them, growing stronger rather than weaker under pressure. They represent both the greatest threat to systems of oppression and the greatest hope for their eventual transformation. Your breathing deepens as sleep takes hold, your body releasing the tensions of another day of forced labor, but your spirit remains alert, carrying with it the accumulated strength of all those who faced similar circumstances before you, the shared hope of all those who faced them alongside you, and the determined faith that current circumstances need not be permanent circumstances. In that alertness, in that strength, in that hope and faith, lies whatever power remains available to those trapped within systems of oppression. It's not the power to change circumstances immediately, but it's the power to maintain humanity despite dehumanizing circumstances, to preserve dignity despite degrading treatment, to sustain hope despite every reason for despair. And in that preservation, in that sustainability, lies the foundation for whatever changes may someday come. For systems built on the denial of human dignity cannot permanently survive when that dignity refuses to be destroyed, when it persists in the hearts and minds of those supposedly reduced to property, when it expresses itself in countless daily acts of resistance too small to punish but too persistent to ignore. The cotton fields stretch away into darkness, their boundaries marking the limits of your physical world, but not the boundaries of your spiritual reach. Beyond those fields lie other plantations with other enslaved communities, other people facing similar circumstances with similar courage, other hearts beating with similar hopes for freedom and justice. Together, though physically separated, these communities represent a force for change that grows stronger rather than weaker under oppression, more determined rather than less determined in the face of systematic attempts to break human spirits. The masters may own bodies, may control movements, may dictate daily activities, but they cannot own spirits, cannot control dreams, cannot dictate the contents of hearts that refuse to surrender hope. Your heart continues to beat with that hope as sleep deepens around you, carrying you toward dreams that may offer brief glimpses of the freedom that seems so distant but remains so real. In those dreams, you walk roads that lead where you choose to go, speak words that express your true thoughts, make decisions based on your own desires rather than others' commands. These dreams, dismissed by oppressors as harmless fantasies, contain truths more powerful than any system built on denying human dignity. They remind you that freedom is your natural state, that bondage is an artificial imposition, that current circumstances represent temporary arrangements rather than eternal realities. And in that reminder lies the strength to face another dawn, another day of cotton picking, another evening of exhausted rest, not just to survive those challenges, but to survive them with humanity intact, with dignity preserved, with hope sustained despite every attempt to destroy it. The stars wheel overhead in their ancient dance, witnesses to countless generations of human struggle, silent observers of the ongoing battle between forces that seek to crush the human spirit and the spirit itself that refuses to be crushed. They've watched empires rise and fall, systems of oppression emerge and collapse, and through it all, the persistence of hope in human hearts that refuse to accept injustice as permanent. Tonight, they watch over another chapter in that eternal story, the chapter being written by people like you, who face impossible circumstances with impossible courage, who maintain impossible hope in the face of overwhelming oppression, who contribute through their simple persistence to the larger struggle for human dignity and freedom. Your chapter continues. Night after night, season after season. Written in the language of endurance rather than eloquence. Recorded in the memory of communities rather than in official histories, but no less important for being invisible to those who measure importance by different standards. In that continuation lies whatever hope exists for a different future, whatever possibility remains for transformation of systems that seem permanent, but are actually temporary. Your survival itself argues for that possibility. Your persistence demonstrates its reality. Your refusal to be broken proves its power. The cotton will be picked tomorrow, as it was picked today, as it has been picked for countless yesterdays. But the people who pick it remain more than their labor, worth more than their productivity, deserving of more than their current circumstances allow. That truth, maintained in hearts that refuse to surrender it, represents the most powerful force for change in any system built on denying human worth. And as you drift deeper into sleep, carrying that truth with you into dreams of roads that lead toward freedom, you contribute to its power simply by continuing to believe it despite every external message that denies it. Your belief joins with countless others, creating a reservoir of hope that will someday overflow the boundaries built to contain it. Until that day comes, the cotton will be picked, the quotas will be met, and the system will continue. But it will continue in the face of persistent resistance over the objections of spirits it cannot break, despite the presence of hearts it cannot own. And in that persistence, in that resistance, in those unbreakable spirits and inaudible hearts, lies the promise of eventual transformation. The night deepens, the plantation sleeps, and your dreams begin dreams that reach beyond cotton fields, toward horizons where freedom waits. Not just as possibility, but as promise, not just as hope, but as inevitable reality. For the human spirit, once awakened to its own worth, cannot be permanently enslaved, and systems built on denying that worth cannot permanently survive its assertion. Your assertion continues, breath by breath, heartbeat by heartbeat, dream by dream, adding your voice to the great chorus of humanity that refuses to accept limitation as permanent, oppression as natural, or dignity as conditional. That chorus grows stronger with each voice that joins it, more persistent with each heart that refuses to surrender hope, more powerful with each spirit that maintains its essential freedom despite external bondage. And in that growing strength, in that increasing persistence, in that expanding power, lies whatever hope exists for a world where stories like yours need no longer be told, because the circumstances that create them no longer exist. Until that world arrives, the stories continue, the dreams persist, and the human spirit maintains its stubborn refusal to accept less than it deserves, which is nothing less than full recognition of its inherent dignity and worth. The stars above bear witness to this refusal, this persistence, this unbreakable hope that survives in the darkest circumstances and grows stronger under pressure rather than weaker. They've watched it survive countless attempts to destroy it, outlast countless systems built to contain it, and emerge from every trial more determined rather than less determined to claim its rightful place in the world. Your sleep deepens, your dreams expand, and your contribution to that eternal struggle continues. Not through grand gestures, but through the simple act of maintaining hope where hope seems impossible, preserving dignity where dignity is denied, and refusing to accept current circumstances as permanent realities. In that refusal lies the seed of all transformation, the beginning of all justice, the foundation of all freedom. It grows in darkness, nurtured by hearts that refuse to surrender, tended by spirits that will not be broken, watered by tears that contain not despair, but determination to see a better day. That better day remains distant, but it remains real as the scars on your hands, as persistent as the hope in your heart. as unbreakable as the human spirit that refuses to accept anything less than full recognition of its worth and dignity. And in that reality lies whatever comfort exists in current circumstances, whatever strength remains for current challenges, whatever hope sustains the long journey toward eventual freedom. You feel the rough burlap still clinging to your skin as these final images fade into the quiet darkness of your own room. The weight of centuries of suffering and resilience settling around your shoulders like a heavy but somehow comforting blanket. The cotton fields dissolve, but the echoes of hummed spirituals and whispered dreams of freedom linger in the air around you, reminding you that the human spirit's capacity for hope in hopeless circumstances remains one of our species' most remarkable achievements. Well, that was certainly a journey none of us will forget anytime soon, and honestly, if you're not feeling completely emotionally drained right now, you might want to check your pulse. If you enjoyed this ride, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss what's coming next. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. How did this immersive experience affect you? What aspects of plantation life surprised you most? And as always, drop your location and local time so we can see where this story is reaching people around the world. Until next time, keep your curiosity alive and your nights filled with wonder.